Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is Peter Lavelle, co-founder of The Gaggle and host of RT's talk show Crosstalk. Well, yesterday, President Biden waddled over to the State Department and delivered a major foreign policy address. There's a number of things to discuss about it. What was remarkable is, first of all, the complete absence of any reference to any American interest at all, any reference to how ordinary Americans will benefit from the Biden foreign policy. What was also ominous about it is that he began speaking about diplomacy. You know, we're back with America's back, diplomacy is back, which of course the kind of thing media love. And then he elaborated on what he meant by diplomacy. And strangely enough, it was all about democracy, promotion of freedom, promotion of values, creating alliances of democracies. And there seemed to be any very strange absence of what diplomacy is supposedly about, which is advancing a country's permanent national interests. So when he says America is back, it sounded an awful lot to the rest of the world as America is back interfering in our affairs, lecturing us, hectoring us, and threatening all sorts of things that he will do to us if we don't follow America's orders. Another interesting aspect of it was the contrasting ways in which he described China and Russia. So when he talked about China, he said, well, you know, we have to concern ourselves with, you know, China sees us as, maybe it'll challenge our one day our global rule or something like that. It sees us as a potential global rival. Russia, on the other hand, is an enemy, and it's thwarting us, and it's damaging us, and it's destroying our democracy. And he trotted out the litany of complaints about what Russia is up to, the usual interference in our elections, cyber crimes, and so on and so forth. So it sounds very much like he's trying to build some kind of an alliance against Russia. So containment is back, Cold War is back, and if that's what America being back is, I think most of the rest of the world is going to say, thanks, but no thanks. Pete, what's your take?
Yeah, it was very boilerplate in many ways, and I agree with you. I mean, it sounded like a speech to the Central Committee of the Soviet Union. Just a lot of platitudes, no certitude, promotion of democracy. Well, we've seen that. We've seen that all over the world. Disasters. Okay, disasters. And it's never about democracy. It's never ever about democracy. And if people inside the Beltway still believe that, and the boneheads in the media, well, then just shame on them. Okay, because the empirical evidence tells you something very differently. Let's just kind of put some bones on the flesh here. What the media picked up was the United States will no longer be supporting Saudi Arabia's war on Yemen. My attitude is, I'll see it when I believe it. Okay, what does support mean? Okay, are we going to see the end of these arms sales, or they're just going to be paused for a while? I'll see it when I believe it. I'll believe it when I see it, because I just don't. Because the speech told you everything you need to know. It's back to the old practices that people are overwhelmingly, public opinion polls, left, right, and center, are against. I thought was something very interesting. I'm sure you saw it here, quoting Biden. Defense Secretary Austin will be leading a global posture review of our forces, so our military footprint is appropriately aligned with our foreign policy and national security priorities. Now, there's going to be no change of policy, apparently. It's going to be a review, okay? And so the soldiers that were supposed to leave Germany, they're going to stay where they are. The deal with the Taliban is going to be null and void. It's all going back to the way it was, which was a disaster. Barack Obama's foreign policy was a disaster, okay?
Right.
And Jake Sullivan is back, okay? These are the type of people, and Blinken is back. These are the type of people who were the architects of that disastrous foreign policy. And now throw in, and you went at great length on it, just throw in the Russiagate hoax too, which has bled into policy here. Another thing Biden said that I really not really sure what to make of it, a foreign policy for the middle class, which was very weird, because my attitude is, and why are you killing off middle class jobs and sending their sons and daughters to these senseless wars? I mean, if you wanted to be nice to the middle class, why don't you do that, Joe? It's like, as obvious as my nose is on my face.
Right. Exactly. And if that's your concern, which is the transfer of jobs overseas, then you would have thought he would have talked about that. And he would have then addressed the issue of China, other than in the sort of nebulous way, is that, well, China maybe sees us as a kind of one day, surpassing us as an economic power. Well, we've just had 4 years of Trump attempting to address, the economic problems created by China. Yet you don't seem to, he seems to have utter contempt for everything that Trump did. But then what about this? What's your stance on this? And he doesn't do it. So as you said, if you're talking about the middle class, then discuss that. How about, ending the shipping of jobs overseas, ending offshoring, getting jobs out of China and back into the United States. It doesn't say any of that. So, and then when he talks about this, how are we going to have this human rights at the center of it? And then, in fact, he linked it to the war against white supremacy in the United States. So in other words, he's going to be doing the same thing abroad, as well as fighting for LGBTQI values. He mentioned that several times in his speech. You can see that he's kind of embarking on a crusade against people in the United States, but he's embarking on a crusade against other countries because, as Obama found, many countries just don't share contemporary American attitude towards social mores. I mean, you can say this is right or this is wrong, but they don't share it. So if you're going to go to another country and say, hey, well, you're not really adhering to our notions of LGBTQI rights, you're setting yourself up for failure. And particularly if you are going to address the rise of China, then many countries are going to say, hey, China's a better ally to us than the United States. They don't give us lectures about LGBTQI values.
Okay, well, I don't even know what the I is now.
I think it's intersex.
Okay, I don't know what that is either. Oh, anyway. The thrust of it, we could kind of look at it in context of American foreign policy, particularly since the end of the Cold War, is there's this lack of recognition that nation states determine what their own interests are. There's no questioning about that. Is it that they don't? Okay, it is determined elsewhere. Right. Another thing is, if you really can't care about the middle class, which is one of the very foundations of the gaggle here, and middle class values, is the debt that is incurred every single year by these bloated defense budgets and contracts that are sent out, is the cost of servicing that debt is past the tipping point. And this is going to starve the middle class and the badly needed, desperately needed infrastructure that the country needs, okay, which would benefit enormously the middle class having high paying, high quality jobs, okay? But that is going to be foregone. They're going to be nation building in Somalia, I suppose. They may have better schools without the propaganda, most likely. But broadly speaking, doesn't this whole speech tell you that the United States will maintain and will enforce its hegemony in the world? That's what this is all about. Yes. It's about hegemony. And no one will challenge that hegemony, not Russia, not China. And even if they're pursuing their own national interests, that will be in violation to American foreign policy interests, which are global because it is hegemonic, okay? And this is what so many people in the world reject, even the Europeans. I mean, it's no surprise. It's no surprise the EU signed a huge investment deal with China right before the Biden administration got into power. They were telling people, they were telling the Americans that, sure, underwrite our defense budget. If you're stupid enough to do it with this fake threat from Russia, that's up to you, okay? That's all right. Poland, you build your Fort Trump. I don't know if that's going to be popular anymore, but maybe in Poland. Okay, but the thing is it's all about hegemony. And it's cloaked in values. But see, when you have a foreign policy that is driven by values, then you inevitably come across people that have no values or are amoral. And a foreign policy like that is a disaster. I don't have to make a prediction. Look at the past. It's a disaster.
Of course it is. No, you're absolutely right. Because when you talk about values and you talk about creating alliances of democracies, you're talking about hegemony. This is American hegemony, but cloaked in nice sounding words.
Of course.
Now, for countries in, the Europeans, they may dislike Trump. They may have thought he was brash, brusque, rude, and in other ways. But at least they knew what he was about. He said, I'm here in the business of trying to get the best deal possible for the United States. And people can say, okay, well, that's your job. You're the president. That's what you're supposed to do. When somebody comes along and says, well, I only care about values, then of course, people can say, well, what are you really about? What's your end game here? What do you mean you really care about values? And so essentially Biden is going back to a kind of a past in which, essentially America was going to be coercing its, quote, allies, unquote, to pursue these nebulous American goals. So when Macron said 2 years ago, whenever he said that, NATO is brain dead, we're going back to brain deadism. That seems to be the new foreign policy doctrine. How can we continue to be brain dead for a little while longer?
The interesting thing is that with this focus on values, trying to project these values and maybe using the barrel of a gun, as Mao once said. But the irony here is that half the United States doesn't believe in those values.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so this is the irony of all ironies: is that the country is more and more divided over values than anything else. Okay, and now it will be projected through the Pentagon and this return to diplomacy, which I don't know what that means. I didn't see a whole lot of diplomacy during the Obama administration.
Right.
I mean, look at John Kerry. I mean, it's documented. He completely duplicitous on Syria. Okay, completely duplicitous.
Right.
And so this is what we're going to go back to. One of the interesting things, for our viewers to understand, George and I focus a lot on hegemony and how hegemony is cloaked in values. A complete juxtaposition of that would have been a speech saying, this is American foreign policy goals based on international law. See, that is the complete juxtaposition.
Right. Yeah, no, that's right. But there's no mention of international law for a very good reason, because if you're going to go down that path, countries are going to start raising all sorts of questions about what America and its allies are doing, and they clearly are not in accord with international law. If you talk about rules-based order, the favorite talking point usually among American and British officials, then of course it's just a matter of whatever Americans and the British declare to be the rule at any particular moment. I mean, then, when it's no longer in accordance with what we want to do, then, we invent another rule. But again, it sounds good. Rules-based order sounds like international law, but of course it isn't. So when they go off and bomb Syria, clearly in violation of international law, they can say, well, we did it in accord with the rules-based order. So yeah, I mean that's what these people like Blinken are about. They just cloak their hegemonic ambitions with soothing sounding words that the media love to regurgitate. But it comes back to what we were saying. What's in it for Americans? And of course, as you say, there's nothing in it for Americans because the Biden people despise at least half of the country. So they, the Democratic crusade they want to embark on against half of the America, let alone the rest of the world.
Yeah, this is a kind of a postmodern neoliberalism for foreign policy, okay? Because when it is value-based, anything is justified. Anything is justified because of values, okay? Not because of national interest. Joe Biden didn't talk anything about national interest whatsoever. As a matter of fact, he made a special cutout, again, going back to Saudi Arabia, that the United States will protect the sovereignty of Saudi Arabia. Now, that's a very interesting comment because its sovereignty is very, very weak because it's a bad actor in the region, okay? Right. Maybe it would be better to say to Riyadh, why don't you why don't you improve your behavior vis-a-vis your neighbors in your region, and then your sovereignty wouldn't be threatened, okay? But they can't speak the obvious because, again, we have to always be clear. Values is talked out on one side of the mouth and big defense contracts on the other side of the mouth, okay? And that's how they're trying to square the circle, which you can't, okay?
Right. No,
it's basically a foreign policy that has flowers in one hand and a gun in another, okay? And it's very, very simple. And as we keep reiterating, it's been tried and it's failed miserably.
Right. That's exactly right. And the Saudi Arabia example is very interesting because there was a lot of talk about how, he's going to cut off arms to Saudi Arabia. He's going to really crack down on Saudi Arabia. There was none of that in the speech. He said that we're going to stop selling arms to support offensive operations in Yemen. Well, I mean, arms like money are kind of fungible. I mean, you sell arms like this, and okay. I mean, offensive, defensive. Who the hell knows? I mean, what you can use one or the other. But he said very specifically, we will defend Saudi Arabia from Iran. So I mean, and again, good. Now that we mentioned Iran, no mention of return to the JCPOA, the big talking point. All of those creatures at the Quincy Institute, Trita Parsi, we're going back to the JCPOA. No mention here. Makes a foreign policy address, and the only reference to Iran is how he's going to deal with Iran should he threaten Saudi Arabia. So that's the big change in the foreign policy.
Well, the interesting thing is that the Iranians are very, very smart. They know that the American public is exhausted by these ridiculous maneuvers and efforts inside the Middle East with the military, because the Middle East is a strategic backwater right now, okay? There's a lot of oil in the world, folks. You don't need to go to the Middle East, okay? There's plenty of it around. It's peak oil right now, and particularly with the prices low. So the Iranians see that, the United States will continue to expend vast resources for something that is of no value to them whatsoever. The only value that the Middle East has is among the people that live there, okay? And I've said so many times is that this ends up being a slippery slope for client regimes in the Middle East to continue their bad behavior. If the United States withdrew all of this support, and I mean financial, military, everything, you know what would happen a week later, George? They'd be sitting around one big table and hashing it out, okay? But the longer the United States stays in the region, where there is no strategic interest whatsoever, the problems of the Middle East will just continue to get worse. All right, and again, all the treasure that is wasted there. Oh, and by the way, China will, with its a Belt and Road Initiative, will just take over the rest of the world. Okay, while the Americans are worried about what Iran's doing. It's how many weeks away, George, are they from a bomb? Okay, we've heard this for 30 years.
Right. No, that's exactly right. So America does all this, spend huge amounts of money on its presence in the Middle East, and China is the beneficiary. China just does it, it doesn't have to do anything. I mean, it just gets the oil right away. I mean, it's fine. Iran, you put sanctions on Iran. Okay, well, China will pick up the slack. So it's kind of, and again, it goes back to what we're saying. What's in it for the United States? But the mentality of the people like Biden and Blinken and others is that, well, you can't even ask that question. We just talk about democracy and values, and a kind of hegemony, which obviously, who does well out of it? Again, the military does extremely well out of it. The whole kind of think tank land, many of whom are also funded by military contractors, or who coming up with these think pieces about foreign policy. Atlantic Council, the sort of NATO Atlanticist establishment, all nicely oiled. So they do very well out of this. And even when he talks about diplomacy and how State Department, we're with the embassies, sounds like he's going to lavish a lot of money on embassies and consulates. For what reason exactly? I mean, we now communicate via Zoom. We have satellites everywhere. We know what's going on. Why do we need more people at embassies? Not to mention the fact that other countries will not be terribly happy to suddenly see the size of a U.S. embassy double.
Well, if we could give a one-line interpretation subtext to Joe's speech, is the following: the grift is on. Okay, because that's all it is. I mean, and then the stress on alliances. If we can step away from NATO, I think that the NATO more or less gets it, particularly in the like the Germans and the French, and the British. They'll hype up the Russian threat, but they know it's not real. But the way the pivot to Asia, the countries that the United States wants to create a Asian NATO. It's a very different mix there, because most of the potential members don't like each other. Okay, no. And so I mean, if you have like Australia, let's say China and Japan fighting over rocks in the ocean, I mean, we need the Australians to come in and help us, and the Filipinos and the South Koreans, and they're just going to say, no, let them fight over rocks. Okay, we're not going to fight over rocks. Okay, it's a very, very different mix in Asia. And we have to remember all of the potential members of the Asia NATO, they all have very strong bilateral relationships with China. Okay, during the Cold War, France and the Soviet Union may have had diplomatic relations, and they did, but they didn't have the kind of trade connections and things like that. I mean, it would be diplomatic, and then, people to people, send high schoolers over to see Moscow, and then Soviet citizens would go to Paris and see the Eiffel Tower. I mean, it was very skinny. Okay, it wasn't very large. But this is a totally different mix, and the attitudes of countries in Asia towards China differ very much. A lot of them, the Japanese have an enormous admiration of Chinese culture. Okay, they do. All right, and South Korea also, because of what they deem as a menace, on and off menace with North Korea, they rely upon Russia and China to mitigate that. And see, these people that think that alliances, they're more dangerous than they're worth. I guarantee you, and they're very, very expensive.
That's exactly right. And that whole model of NATO containment, Red Army threat, it just doesn't apply. I mean, it kind of, may have applied very briefly in the kind of, let's say, to be generous to NATO, the 1945 to 1970 era. It didn't apply after 1970, and it certainly doesn't apply now. If you're really going to address China's emergence as a global economic giant that rivals the United States, then you have to address issues here at home, and the way the Chinese have basically bought up America's elite, and who are more than happy to ship jobs overseas, more than happy to kowtow to the Chinese in order to get access to the Chinese market. That's what you have to address if you're going to address China. But setting up these kinds of Asian NATOs is the stupidest thing, because, as you say, no one's going to want to join.
The sad thing here, something that you and I have been thinking and talking about a lot privately, is this growing censorship. The foreign policy vision, if you can call it a vision at all, of the Biden administration is not what the American people want. We know that demonstrably, that they're not interested in this. So, they're going to be the Biden people in their orbit are not going to be happy with people like us, because we speak from what people tell us and what we see with polls and trends here. This is, he was speaking to an elite about their vested interests, their careers, their jobs, the revolving door. When they leave government, they go into contracting and consulting and all that. It's a closed shop, and it's so divorced from reality. And the real threat to American foreign policy is division in America. That's the biggest threat.
That's exactly, and that's something we will have to discuss on another program, which is, how does the rest of the world contemplate the lunacy that is going on in America? I mean, maybe many of them wanted to see Trump gone, but even that isn't universally true. But let's say in Europe, they wanted to see Trump gone. And then now they see this absolute insanity. I mean, they're rushing towards impeachment, trying to criminalize half of the population. They think, America is a source of instability in the world because it's the society is so divided. How on earth can you say America is back, we're the global hegemon, if you're basically completely hopelessly divided at home?
I just have to wonder personally that, when the Biden speeches is read and understood in capitals around the world, allies of the United States, I wonder how many of them said, nobody said anything to us. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is what our foreign policy interests and defense and security interests are moving forward. We just found out from the President of the United States.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Talk about allies. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
No, I really want to stress. I think that it's not talked enough about the European Union's agreement to sign a huge investment deal with China. That is a big milestone, and it's not gotten the coverage it deserves. No, because they're putting a marker down. They're putting a marker down.
No, that's it. That's exactly right. Because as far as the U.S. media are concerned, Europe is just America's backyard. And once Trump is out of the way, Europe is going to come back and say, "Oh, great, Biden's back. The Atlanticists are back. All the whole, military contractors are back. The whole foreign policy establishment is back, and Europe will just come around." It's not going to happen. I mean, Trump expects a rift between Europe and America that's been growing for quite a while.
For me, what I find really disturbing is that there's this tendency, because it's value-driven, so-called value-driven, is it's so easy to demonize others, okay? But that's not a foreign policy. That's not our policy. And I see it in American media, this great, particularly like Fox News and all that, demonizing China. And, I'm not going to make any judgments here, but I think it's more important to understand China instead of just spending all your time demonizing it. Because, China is not Panama. Don't want to pick on Panama, but China counts, okay? World would get along without Panama. Sorry, Panama, but it's true, okay? And that's why we need a lot more sophistication here, and what we're getting is not. And I in many ways, I kind of blame Trump for that as well, because it wasn't as nuanced as I think it could have been. I think readdressing trade deals is very, very important. Trump got that one right, okay? But the way it's being approached now is not because having better trade deals. It's like, will they accept our values? Well, that's a dead end.
No, that's exactly that. Exactly, that is the moment you start going to them and start interfering in their internal affairs, you've lost the argument. They're not going to accept it. But if you address, as you said, trade deals, you address how they've bought up kind of America's elite and what to do about that. And then, and of course, then address the virus, the origins of the virus, and why the Chinese continue to be so secretive about the origins of the virus. In other words, issues that matter to Americans, rather than how they're treating the Uyghurs, which ultimately isn't really a matter for Americans.
Well, but I always, it's a very simple test of these kind of things. So you want to go to war with China over the Uyghurs? I mean, it's a simple question. It's a simple question. Okay, you claim without any evidence for over 4 years now that Russia was meddling in the 2016 election all the way to the present. You have no evidence about that, but Russia is a mortal threat. You want to go to war over this? You have to decide. Okay, you have to decide.
right.
You can't have it both ways. And that's why we have these people in power with such a lack of sophistication. They're all credentialed. I do not deny that. But you have, it kind of tells you, or must ask you the question, what is the value of these credentials if this is the way you're thinking?
Exactly. And these credentials is more or less just simply punching your ticket. I mean, you go through a kind of a career path, you punch your ticket, and then you move on to the next step. But you don't actually acquire any wisdom along the way. And I think your point about, what are you going to do about it? We were always asking this during the whole Russiagate nonsense. Oh, Trump is very soft on Russia. Trump is soft on Putin. He hasn't really addressed the matters that are important with Putin. What's the plan here? I mean, what's Trump supposed to do? I mean, he's supposed to go to war with Russia. He's going to launch a missile and hit the Kremlin. I mean, so what exactly do you want to do about Russia? And then they never answer that. They just say, "Oh, Trump isn't doing anything."
Yeah, but a more mature and cool-headed approach would be what Richard Nixon did. The Soviet Union was supplying North Vietnam with weapons. Most of the Chinese were helpful, but of course it was the Soviet Union first. And those weapons killed Americans in the Vietnam conflict. Right. At the same time, I think they met in Geneva in 1969. 1969, the first meetings for arms control.
It was in May 72, the Moscow summit.
No, but the negotiations for that started even during the Vietnam War. The United States and the Soviet Union were proxies in a war in Southeast Asia. But they didn't say, well, because you're doing that, we're not going to talk about arms control. But that's the position these people have now in power. It's very juvenile. Richard Nixon, for all his flaws, and there were many, he was a foreign policy genius, okay? Because he understood what was at stake here. The Biden people don't have a clue. Trump had good instincts. He just had bad policy around him, bad advice, and he lacked discipline. Because we don't have a Trump doctrine, okay? Right. We could have had one. We could have had one where American foreign policy is based on America's interests, okay? Not our friends, because friends are transitory. The country stays.
Right, that's exactly right. And I think Trump's instincts were that that's exactly what he wants. He wants a partnership with countries where there are common interests. I mean, what you said about Nixon was very interesting because when he went to Moscow in May 1972 to sign the SALT and the ABM treaties, at that very moment, the US bombers were hitting Soviet ships in Haiphong. They were unloading arms for the North Vietnamese. And even so, both the United States and the Soviet Union thought it was more important to sit down and negotiate than getting very upset about what was going on in Haiphong. And I think Trump instinctively understood that, but he didn't have the perseverance. So when he met Putin in Helsinki, which could have been a historic moment, but he came under such ferocious attack. He was a traitor. He accepted Putin's word over the words of the CIA.
But he was right.
He was right. He was right. Any intelligent person would have accepted Putin's word than the words of the CIA. He kind of backed off. And I think, again, it was part of the unraveling of his presidency that this was a historic moment and he squandered it.
And it was the American foreign policy blob in collusion with the media. When you think of the Helsinki summit, it was all about American domestic politics. Exactly. What foreign policy issue do you remember from it? I don't.
None at all. None at all. And I remember, I think we had Stephen Cohen talked about that. He said, well, this is the first step. And now they're going to go on into discussing in detail all the different areas like Syria, maybe the JCPOA. None of that materialized. So, it was the first and last step.
But see, they go back to our original topic with Biden. The problem here is we have rising powers in the world. American foreign policy, American power in the world is slowly dissipating. I think that's universally understood. Some people are really terrified by it. But the thing is that the United States has to understand that it has peers in the world, and it will refuse to accept that it has a peer.
Right.
And that is very, very dangerous because anyone approaching peerage, I think in this case, is a threat.
Right.
And that is not a wise foreign policy.
No,
See, what I keep stressing to people, the Cold War reshuffled the cards in so many different ways. And with the end of the Cold War and that very short time of the unipolar moment, that's passed, okay, we've gone back to what global politics have been from time immemorial. It's great power politics, okay? It's not based on friendship. It's not based on I like you, okay? No, it's not even. It has never been and never will, and it shouldn't be based on values.
no,
The
no.
last thing it should be based on is values.
And this is again very interesting because back in 1969, at the beginning of the sort of the Nixon détente era, they already, and the United States was in a much stronger position then than relative to the rest of the world than it is today. They realized if we're going to take on the Soviet Union, we're going to need an ally, and they cultivated China as an ally. If you look at Biden, I mean, Biden wants bad relations with Russia, bad relations with China, and hector the rest of the world on LGBTQI values. That isn't a prescription for success.
I just have to wonder if Putin and Xi had a call. It's just like, oh, there he goes again. There they go again. Keep doing the same thing and failing and assuming that if you do it again, you're going to succeed is just the definition of stupidity. And that's exactly what it was. It was a sad speech. It was a speech that talked about a world that might have existed at one point in time, but is long, long gone. And with the divisions at home, it comes out so stale and hollow. Yes. And boilerplate that were,
exactly.
You're just talking, you're talking to the grifters, and they loved it. Okay,
that's right. It has absolutely no bearing on the world today. So it was boilerplate, cliches from some long ago era, but the media lapped it up, and that's says something about our time. All right. Well, thank you, Peter. We will be maintaining, of course, our laser-like focus on the Biden team's hapless foreign policy. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.